You are listening to The Framework of Tomorrow, hosted by Keegan Goldfarb, and brought to you by Rally Network and our sponsor, Ashley Luann Kay, who is a YouTuber conquering the nurse life, one YouTube video at a time. Please go check her out at Ashley Luann Kay on YouTube. Thank you, and enjoy this episode of The Framework of Tomorrow. Hello and welcome to The Framework of Tomorrow. My name is Keegan Goldfarb, and this is my first episode of this new podcast. So my kind of mission for The Framework of Tomorrow is I'm going to use the history that we know it of the world, aka the framework, and help, not help, but more evaluate current situations in the world or current problems, or just evaluate any sort of topic that is either asked to be evaluated of or that I want to evaluate. Just a quick information thing. I am part of a network of podcasters. The network is called Rally Network. Go check them out at rallynetwork.net. And yes, so today on The Framework of Tomorrow, we are going to evaluate a certain situation that has been in the world recently. I'm not going to talk about it specifically because everybody is talking about it right now. If you don't know, I don't know how you don't know, but coronavirus. Coronavirus is a big problem in the world right now, and because of the amount of actual information on that people are reporting on the coronavirus and the lack of statistics on it right now, I'm not going to touch it because it's kind of controversial to talk about. But instead, I am going to talk about all of the past pandemics that have happened. The top three that I thought would be useful to evaluate and kind of go over. So what happened during these three pandemics? So first things first, what is a pandemic? A pandemic is a disease that affects a whole country or the entire world. And then what is an epidemic then? And an epidemic is a disease that is actively spreading that has grown out of control. So you could classify the coronavirus as both a pandemic and an epidemic because, one, it is affecting the entire world. Almost every country, I believe every country has a case of coronavirus. Don't take that with a grain of salt. I don't know if that's actually true. Like I said, that's why I'm not reporting on it, because there isn't actual solid statistics out there right now. So I'm not going to touch it. But it is pretty much in the entire world, so it is classified as a pandemic, and it is an epidemic because it is still currently spreading at a pretty fast rate, although it is slowing down now that people are staying inside and kind of taking the necessary precautions that the government is putting in place. The first major pandemic, I think, that showed up in written history as we know it is known as the Black Death. So according to history.com, the Black Death, it was a bubonic plague that struck Europe and Asia in the mid-1300s when 12 ships from the Black Sea, docked at the Sicilian port of Messina. People gathered on the docks were met with a horrifying surprise. So these ships showed up in the Sicilian port, and most of the sailors aboard these 12 ships were dead, and those that were alive were gravely ill, and just covered in these black boils on their skin that just oozed blood and pus. It's kind of disgusting, I know. And the Sicilian authorities hastily ordered the fleet of, they called them death ships. They ordered the fleet go back out to the harbor. But at that point, it was too late, and they had already transmitted the Black Death, the bubonic plague, to the people that met them on those docks there. And over the next 5 years, the Black Death would kill more than 200 million people in Europe, which is almost 1/3 of the continent's population during that time. 200 million people. So how did this start? How did the Black Death begin? How did this horrible disease begin? Many of the Europeans had heard before this whole ship incident that there was some sort of disease in China, India, Persia, and Syria, as well as Egypt. And they're hearing that some sort of disease was happening over there, and scientists they've got data that has pointed back that it actually originated in China and spread through the trading route back then. It spread through the traders. And how did it spread so fast? Like, how does these diseases spread so fast? So the Black Plague was actually so contagious, it spread through touch, even just something as simple as like touching someone's clothes, like that would transmit it. It spread through the air. It spread through most notably animals, like rodents and rats and fleas. So if you've ever heard, I'm sure you've heard of the Black Death, all you think of, or at least all I think of, is like, rats running around Europe. And that's why people were so scared of rats back in the early mid 1300s in Europe, because rats were one of the main things that carried this Black Death plague. And I would not want to get this plague that would cover you in just these horrible boils. And people could actually go to bed. They could go to bed at night perfectly healthy, and then not wake up the next day because they had contracted this disease, this plague. So this disease, the people called these boils all over the people, they call them plague boils. So it caused these plague boils, as well as fever, chills, vomiting, diarrhea, terrible aches and pains, and later causing a horrible death. So you experience all those things for the most part, and then you just die. So the bubonic plague attacks the lymphatic system, causing swelling in the lymph nodes, and if untreated, the infection can spread to the blood or the person's lungs. Sadly, back in the mid 1300s, all the way up until mid 1900s, they didn't have enough knowledge on medical practice to even understand how to treat this, especially in the mid 1300s. They did not really understand, so they used very primitive ways of treating things like this. They used herbs and other sorts of medieval practices. They believed that this plague was some curse that God has set upon them for turning away from him. That's what the early Catholic Church believed in Europe, and they believe if you got it, that was just God saying, sorry, you're done. I laugh, but it was very, very serious back then. This plague, here's the thing that blew my mind away when I was researching this. This plague actually never went away. This plague is still here in the world. And according to the World Health Organization, there are about 1,000 to 3,000 cases of these exact symptoms with like the boils and everything today, which is nuts. It's crazy to me that this can still exist. It's crazy. But at the end of this whole pandemic, it is estimated that there was around 75 to 200 million deaths in the world due to this plague, and 10% to 60% of the deaths caused by this plague was deaths in Europe. And the Black Plague ended up resurfacing a couple times in history, but most notably on a larger scale. It resurfaced around 1855 to around 1960. And so it was kind of just lingering around in history around that time period. And in that time period of about 100 years, so 95 years, it killed 12 million people in both India and China. So the Black Plague was a pretty crazy plague. Sadly, there was not enough medical knowledge for people to get away from that, but it was a horrible, horrible thing. And I'm sure you've seen movies, and I know I've played a couple video games where in time periods this Black Plague is showing, it shows up as a theme in these time periods in early Europe, in England, and stuff like that. And most notably, you see a theme of these, like the rats, and people are scared of the rats. And yes, so that was the first and probably most notable, and probably the one people most know about because of it being in media and movies and video games and stuff like that, and in books. The second most notable pandemic in history was the Chloria Disease. And according to the World Health Organization, this disease came from unclean water and food that had bacteria called Chloria. So Chloria, for the first outbreak of Chloria, it started in 1817. It came from India. It came from a farm that had contaminated rice. So this rice was not clean rice, and it had this Chloria bacteria on it. And that is where the very first outbreak of this came from. So what is the Chloria disease? What does it do? It's a diarrheal disease, actually. And it takes about 12 hours to 5 days to take effect. That's a pretty big, it could either take 12 hours or 5 days. That's a pretty big time span of how long it can actually take effect. And once it does take effect and you start getting these diarrheal symptoms, it can kill you within hours if untreated by antibiotics, which they did not have when this first came out. So throughout history, so it started in 1817, there have been 7 outbreaks of this disease through history. First one is 1817, and the 7th outbreak was in 1990. So this is about 100 or more than 100 years. It's been about 200 years since this came out. It's actually, the 7th outbreak is still currently active in the world. So this is almost a 200-year, or no, it is a 200-year, 203 years that this has been around. And it's the 7th one. So it's been 30 years now since the 7th one broke out, and it's still here. But the difference is between when it first came out and now is that we actually have a vaccine for it now. It can actually be pretty well treated and pretty easy to treat. So the 7th outbreak, it broke out in South Asia, Africa, and the Americas. So North and South America. I have not heard it being in Northern America. I didn't hear about this before I researched it. So I'm assuming it's probably more in the tropics and or in South America. But researchers say that this is current stats, that there are about 1.3 to 4 million cases of chloria and 21,000 to 143,000 deaths every year from this disease. Every single year, there are a range from 21,000 to 143,000 deaths each year from this disease. So here's how they fight against it. Chloria today is being prevented by water surveillance. So they're having people go and test these waters on a pretty routine basis to make sure the water's clean and the water that is being used to water the crops is clean. I have actually seen the testing of, not specifically chloria, but the testing of water from the DNR a couple years back. I remember I was by a stream by my house, and the DNR was there, and they were testing the water for E. coli, because E. coli was it is a bacteria that can show up in water sources. So they make sure it's not there so that they can make sure people can swim in it and stuff like that, because you don't want to get E. coli. It's pretty nasty. It's another diarrheal thing. Not as severe as chloria, but it is still a problem. So the good thing about, I guess you could say, about chloria right now, and about diseases in general, is that they're being active. Organizations are being active, and scientists and world leaders are being active about, hey, how can we prevent this since it's happened? So yeah, they're doing water surveillance, hygiene, water treatment, and like I said, they have a chloria vaccine. So that was the second, probably major pandemic in history. The third, and actually the most deadliest pandemic we know in history, hands down, is the Spanish flu. So the Spanish flu, it happened in 1918. And according to history.com, 500 million people got infected in the first year of the Spanish flu in the world. And about 1/3 of the population in 1918, 500 million people is 1/3 of the population of the time. And it killed about 20 million to 50 million people. So where did the Spanish flu come from? Where did this show up? You might think, oh, it came from Spain. Spanish. Duh. It's called the Spanish flu. It actually didn't. They don't know where the Spanish flu originated from. But it first showed up in Europe, and then it went traveling from the United States to Asia, and then the rest of the world. So this went all throughout the world. And at the time, there was no vaccine to treat this flu. And citizens were ordered to wear masks, and schools and theaters and businesses were shut down, and bodies were actually being piled up in makeshift morgues before the virus ended its global destruction, you could say. But like I said, the Spanish flu, even though it was called the Spanish flu, did not originate in Spain. The only reason it's called the Spanish flu is because Spain was the first country to report on this flu. During this time period, the media was very, very quiet on the Spanish flu, which is why we actually don't know exactly how many people got infected and exactly how many people died. And statistics like that is because the media actually was very quiet, especially in America, which resulted in more people dying. Spain was just the first to actually report on this. In the Spanish, poor Spanish, they actually believed that it was from France. So they in Spain, they were calling it the French flu. They're like, guys, it's the French flu. And they're like, no, it's the Spanish flu. Because you guys were the first to report on it. But no one actually, to this day, knows how or where it originated. So, like I said, there was no vaccine for the Spanish flu for a pretty long time. Until 1940. It took them till 1940 to ever get a vaccine for the Spanish flu. And if anyone in America, if anyone was caught outside without a mask, they were fined $5, which sounds very little compared to like how much money we make today and how much money that is. It's like I don't know, a combo meal at McDonald's is $5. It's probably more expensive than that now. But that's how much it was when I was growing up. Anyway, $5 fine. And so they were not allowed to go outside without a mask. I don't believe schools were actually closed during this time, surprisingly. But by the summer of 1919, the epidemic finally came to its end. But since the Spanish flu has happened, there has been many outbreaks of influenza. I'm sure you know what that is, or just flu in general, but influenza outbreaks in America and throughout the world. Most notably, the swine flu, also known as H1N1, killed 12,000 Americans when that happened. That wasn't a worldwide pandemic, though. That happened in America. Yes. So, over these three major pandemics, I have kind of gone over all of the different ways it affected people, how the world reacted. So with the Black Plague, the world really reacted with a lot of fear. There was a lot of fear in that time of rats and even being around people. And many people died. Lots of people died in Europe because of it. And with Chloria, what we learned from Chloria is that we can now have like measures put in place by like testing the water and making sure everything's clean before we water our crops with it. And it just comes down to basic hygiene with the Chloria, and that's how that's being fought off. And then the influenza, I'm sure I would be very surprised if you haven't had a strand of influenza or like the flu, because it's a very common thing today. And you know that you can go to your local CVS, not sponsored, and get a shot every year that you can prevent that. And whether how effective that shot is, there has been arguments, because sometimes they don't know what strain it is that year. But either way, there's still a preventative measure. So we have learned to be pretty receptive at this point to what we should do in times of pandemics. We don't, everybody, like, freaking out, it's not going to get you anywhere. I think what we've learned at this point is that we should trust the people who are in charge of this situation and how they're doing it, and respect what they tell us to do, because we've learned at this point what to do and how to prevent situations. So right now, America is, we're all staying inside. We're quarantining. We're trying to limit contact with other human beings. And I believe that it's going to start slowing down at this point, and we're going to hit our peak in the next couple of weeks of the coronavirus. And it will go back down. Like I said, don't take my word for it. Don't take anyone's word for it actually right now, because not everyone knows. But for now, what we can do is stay inside and limit contact with others, and it will limit the spread of this current pandemic, and hopefully it won't turn into another Spanish flu or Black Plague and stuff like that. Well, it most likely won't, because we're already putting way more preventative measures than they did, and I'm sure we'll have a vaccine out soon for it. But one of my comments on it, like I said, I wasn't going to talk about the coronavirus, but I'll give one little comment. I do think something interesting about the Spanish flu was there was no vaccine for it for a long time. I think we'll find a vaccine in the next 20 years. That's a long time. But what happened with the Spanish flu is it actually turned into a way less mild, or a very mild version of it, which most people get, like I said, every year. And it can now be treated with certain antibiotics and different kinds of medical practices that we have today. And I think that will probably be what happens with the coronavirus. And we can prevent that every season it comes, if it comes back. And I think we're going the right direction. And I think especially looking back at all of the different kinds of pandemics and epidemics that have happened in the world, that we can have hope that we are not going down the same path that those pandemics and epidemics had. They're not spreading nearly as fast, because we know, like I said, from these past experiences, that what we should do in times of these times, I can't speak. And yeah. So thank you so much for listening to the first episode of The Framework of Tomorrow. I really hope you took something away from this episode and you learned something. I'll be releasing episodes weekly, and like I said, I am a part of a network called Rally Network. I would encourage you to go check out rallynetwork.net. There's many other amazing podcasters on that. If you have any interests at all, you should go check them out, because I'm sure you'll find your interest on there. We're just starting out, and we really would just appreciate the support right now, because that's what gets us up and going. And like I said, thank you so much for listening, and have a fantastic rest of your day. I'm Keegan Goldfarb, and this was The Framework of Tomorrow.